Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art and Talk. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Art and Talk. If you've been watching Art and Talk for a while, you know we're all about meeting artists and being inspired, stepping into the heart and mind of our guest artists to gain wider perspective of their art, their message, and their artistic voice. So today we're continuing to bring you another artist from the Art Acquisitions exhibit, Large and Small, currently on view at the Cultural Council for Palm Beach County and Lake Worth Beach, Florida. We hope you've had a moment to view some of the other artist videos. We hope you're enjoying them. We hope you draw inspiration from them, and we hope you find them informative as well. If you're new to Art and Talk, thank you so much for being here. All right, so let's talk about our guest for today. He is a sculptor and he's an interdisciplinary artist based in Palm Beach, Florida, and also in New York City. He has a fascination with the transmission of light and the reflection of light. So we'll be looking at some select images of his artwork and of course be diving into his artistic journey. All right, so again, thank you for being with us. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome our guest for today, Ezra Hubbard. Hi, Ezra, welcome.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Your work is so fascinating, and there's so many different areas that I'd like to tap into with our time with you today. I thought that first, Ezra, if it's okay with you, that maybe we could open the show with looking at some of your interests, some of your influences, and exploring that, and then seeing how that has shaped your aesthetic and your artistic voice and your artistic style. Like, for example, in your bio, Ezra, you mentioned that your art is about the movement of transcendence, and then it's sparked by deep reflections of people, of time, of the subconscious, and other areas too, dreams. So can you give us some of these areas that are strong influences, strong factors that help to shape your art, and how do they play out in your art?
Sure. For me, I think there's the role of the artist oftentimes as both as a cultural commentator, but also as a cultural producer. And I feel like so much of the space that we're in now is we're shifting from this very what one would say in situ or in-person interaction with other people, and that so much, especially coming out of the pandemic, we spend so much time with our screens. So it's a different type of reflection that we get from other people through screens. And one of the things that does for me is also opens up a space for our encounter with deeper spiritual things and even philosophical things. So to me, that plays a large role in the expression of what it is that the art is meant to talk about. It's very easy to say, here's an inflammatory comment that someone made, and let me have a direct response to it. But I think oftentimes for artists and poets and even musicians at times, there's this calling to say, what is it really? What is our life about? Let's ask the big philosophical questions. And to me, I feel very blessed to be in a position where I am able to explore those. And to me, that's largely what it's all about. In terms of dreams and the subconscious, I've been heavily involved with Jungian psychology for a number of years. And for me, that plays a major role in it. And then also roles of religious seekers and spirituality and that kind of thing. I'm looking over here at a bookshelf that's usually quite busy, but I've just moved into a new studio space. This is more of a design studio, so I don't have all my books, but they'll make it here eventually.
So we're talking about, as you said, like the larger question of life, bringing in recent events, as with the pandemic, and kind of using that word as screens, and looking at spiritual things, looking at psychology as well, and then bringing all of these questions and exploration into your art.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of that, in a way, is the encounter. I know in my work, oftentimes it's not directly figurative or directly. I have a good friend who paints images of horses and landscapes, and with her work, it's much easier to kind of say, ah, I know what I'm looking at. Whereas for me, I like there are two premises that I kind of work with. One is for the work to create an environment or to set the stage for an encounter to happen. The other is so much of what we see or perceive is largely what we bring to the table. Even as something as simple as an encounter with another person, if I'm already excited or aggravated or angry, my encounter with them is going to be, has a much greater chance of being volatile, rather than I've just come from a very meditative, peaceful place and wow, okay, I can open up to this person and have an interesting interaction. And to me, that's so much a part of the work in general, even moving beyond the sense we know the relative quality of our perception of color. I mean, think Joseph Albers or one of these guys, where a neighboring color has a direct influence on how we perceive a given color. But as we continue to learn in science, there's a little tiny shrimp called a mantis shrimp that we've recently found in the last 10 years or 5 years, bottom of the ocean. And the way our eyes are designed as humans, you know, we have roughly 3 sort of segments of color perception. And it's easier for us in a way to see how we perceive red, green, and blue, to simply put it. Like a dog or a cat has 2, but their bands are wider so that they will perceive some of the same colors that we do, but in a different way. So this little mantis shrimp, he has anywhere between 12 and 16 different forms and ways of perceiving color and visual stimulus around him. You know, we all remember pictures of the way a bug or an insect or even a bumblebee will perceive a flower, that they can see into the ultraviolet spectrum. But this little guy can see like polarized light. You know, if we have polarized sunglasses, when you turn the sunglasses, suddenly it goes dark, so that it allows this shrimp to be able to see predators, to see other fish and all these sorts of things. And then it has super specialized forms of vision and perception that we don't fully understand. One of them is even involved in, like, when they're ready to mate, they can see something differently in the other one. And we don't have that. We barely even have language for our full range of perception as it is. So to me, all of that plays into the work, and it's an exciting time to be able to make work, really.
And it sounds like, Ezra, that this movement towards transcendence, as I'm listening to you elaborate on all these different areas, it sounds like it's to, like, break free, like move into, I guess you could say, a higher state of consciousness, a higher plane, kind of like exploring more potential, as well as bringing an experience to the viewer through your art. Is that kind of in the right ballpark?
Yeah. I think there's, you know, ultimately we all want to contribute to the world as a whole. And how do we do that? And if we can do that by either through prayer or prayer in action, I think it's a blessed place to be. Stuff that we can do, you know.
Do you have a certain protocol prior to going into your studio when you're getting ready to create your art, Ezra? Like, for example, do you practice a certain meditation or a certain way that you kind of set yourself up, so to speak, to be in a certain space to create your art? Does that have any factor at all?
Absolutely. So probably, let's see now, how long has it been? Almost 30 years ago, I met Julia Cameron, who's famous for her book, The Artist's Way. And in there is this practice of morning pages, of 3 pages every day, getting rid of all the chatter in your head, you know, whatever's going on. Sometimes it will be as simple as, these are the things that I need to do that day. And other days it'll be, this person drove me nuts yesterday, you know, whatever the current wherever the head is at that moment, whatever trip it's on, so to speak, to be able to get that down on paper, which slows the process down, because as we know, our mind can move incredibly quickly. It moves even much more quickly than even when we speak at our most rapid. It's still moving at miles and miles and miles and miles along a second, or however one measures the speed of the mind. That's an interesting question. So for me, that's one of the ways that it clears out a lot of the noise and a lot of the static, and it makes it much easier to follow the thread, either of whatever the thing is at that particular moment that I'm curious about, which to me is such an important underlying principle in the creation of art, is follow what you're interested in, rather than worrying about, is this going to be perceived as good art or not good art? It doesn't matter. Let the historians, let the critics, even the gallerist figure out what the framework is. And I'm using that loosely and carefully, because I do think it is important for the artist to understand and to know how their work, one, to be able to talk about their work, but two, also to understand the context historically. If art is a sort of a continual conversation that's evolving over time and over hundreds of years now, if not even thousands, how does our work as an individual contribute to that ongoing conversation? So that all of these different elements are part of it, and part of being an artist. And yeah, if that helps to clarify.
Yes, yes, I love that practice, and I'm so grateful that you shared that, and all these different sort of like musings and areas that you think about that influence your art. It's very, very fascinating, and your art has such deep implications in it as well. I think this would be a great moment to show the viewers some of your work and have you share about it as well.
Sure.
So give me just a moment and let's pull them up. Okay, here's the first one.
Mm. Do you have a thought you want to express and I'll comment, or are you?
I think we'll just kind of go with what you'd like to share. I mean, immediately I have a transported feeling, and you know, the whole, you know, word we've been using a few times here, and that you mentioned in your bio, you know, the movement towards transcendence. That is definitely my first feeling, and of course the use of color and just, you know, some of the, you know, design elements of art also as well.
So this is interesting, actually, that you've brought this image up first, because there is obviously the light on the left-hand side of the image, but the abstract work to the right of it are the colors, the blues, the oranges, there's sort of the grays, and there's the perception of all kinds of different colors. To me, that all actually comes from black ink. I use a couple of different chemicals to break down that black ink into, it breaks down into its own colors. It breaks down into colors. And then that's the process of that work as it dries. And of course, when you first begin to break down, have this chemical solution on the black ink, it sort of sits there as a pool. So you have to give it some motion. So breathing onto the work to get it to spread out, to get it to move, to me is interesting, because there is the so at one point I studied iconography. There's the Greek and Russian Orthodox practice of painting the Christian saints, with oftentimes depicted with a gold halo around them. And traditionally there's almost everything in that is done as a prayer, or as a way of worshiping God. So in that, there's a moment where the traditional way of adding gold to the image is there's gold, it's called boule, which is sort of a reddish clay. And then to get the gold to adhere to it, you breathe on the clay, and that creates enough moisture for then the gold leaf to stick. And the idea behind that is, you know, from clay we are essentially from ashes to ashes and dust to dust and that sort of thing, and that we've come from the clay. but it's the illumination of God that brings, it's the breath of God that brings illumination. So going back to the beginning of even the Old Testament, of this idea of, and God breathed on the land and there was light, or into the void and there was light. So the same action of saying, with that memory, now I breathe upon it and apply light. And to me, I love that when there's a much deeper connection. And
Yeah.
specifically in this, with coming from the black into the colors, Jung at one point had this great quote where he said, in order to find the light, we must be willing to search the darkness. And of course, for him, that represents the darkness or the shadow of the subconscious. You know, so frequently the things that we put there that are expressed in the conscious, and the dream state is the thing that allows that to speak a little bit more freely, but oftentimes we don't have the direct association of what's being said. And to me, yeah, I get excited about that stuff.
Yes, and I love that what you're sharing, Ezra, and that holy breath, you know, almost like a sacred act that you impart into your artwork is so deep and so profound, and I'm so glad that you shared that. And also, so now I see some tie-ins also with your interest in the subconscious, and you know, kind of like clearing out the mind, clearing out the subconscious to move towards the light, and kind of referencing that back to your beautiful practice that you have, you know, with, you know, kind of writing and, you know, being authentic with, you know, the frustrations and irritations of the day, but, you know, whatever's, you know, going on in the mind, to kind of clear that out and then be in that space of pure, as you said, interest or pure creation.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, in a way, ultimately what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why are you doing what you're doing? You got something to say.
Yeah.
Let's get through it.
All right, we have some more to look at. Was there anything else, Ezra, you'd like to share about this one?
No, other than it's an image that I like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. All right. Wow.
So this is a piece that was almost, this was an installation at the Armory Art Center in West Palm Beach in Florida. And that was a circular space, so that one walked into the space in order to encounter the work. And for me, there was the tradition of, you know, the Native American tradition of the hogan, or a round structure, as that was the place where we would go to have an encounter with the spirit, or to have a, it wasn't used as a regular dwelling. The round space was used as, was a sacred space. I used to live out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there was we had a geodesic dome greenhouse. And I remember a friend who's an artist came into the space one time, and there's that delight of the senses, because you're relieved of right angles, and how we often associate our spatial interaction with planes and right angles of buildings and all these sorts of things. And he was saying that he used to live in a geodesic dome, and more than once, when someone would come over to visit and they'd hang out for a little while, they would have entered the space through a door. And of course, everything is either an octagon or a hexagon or some sort of geometric shape that they walk through. But after they had been there for a little while, they would say, I know I entered this space, but I don't know how to get out. Can you show me where the door is? Because we're so used to this construct of right angles and planes. And to me, that's also, there's some other work, I don't know if you have those photos, but to me, that is also spoken of. To me, it's interesting that the influence that spatial reality or spatial influences have on our perception and the way we think, and even in terms of compartmentalization. I remember there was one of these exercises of how to memorize a grocery list of 100 things or something like that. And one of the first tools they do is to either use what one would call a memory palace, or an entire room or a house. And inside each room, you put a different thing, and then that allows you to memorize the space, so that the space then becomes the holder of all these different little tidbits of memory or things that you want to memorize. And of course, that's a way of actively compartmentalizing based on an immersive memory of a space.
Mhm.
So to me, all those kinds of things are interesting. This piece also had sound, which I think is extremely influential in terms of transporting one to another space.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Can you describe the sound so we can get kind of a feel as we're looking at this, what we would actually be listening to if we were in this space?
Sure. So Brian Eno had a thing that he was working with for a while of using generative sound. So it would be, imagine a tone, almost like the tone of a singing bowl or something like that. It's a fairly clear tone that then fades briefly over time before being closed completely. And it's hard to describe sound, as you know. So he was experimenting with creating the construct of the work, oftentimes almost the way, I know you know the artist Saul DeWitt, the way he would create a map for how the piece should be made. So it's like an instruction set. And for him, part of the reference that he was using is saying, it's almost like a work of music. It's like a musical composition, where the artist or the performer may have his own interpretation of the piece as he's creating it. But the information on the page is what he's presented. So then you get someone like Brian Eno, who then comes back from the other direction and says, here is an electronic algorithm that will create the variabilities, even though you've given it a construct to create the sound. So there's a random element to where the tone fits on the tonal scale, the duration of the tone, but they're not so far out of left field that it comes across as noise. There's a pleasant sense to it. So this was working with some of those elements to create sound, to shift the listener into a space where there's the re-engagement of, so there's the spatial relationship, which creates, okay, I'm in a different space. There's the sound, which means you can hear before you even get into the space. So knowing that there's something else happening here, which kind of brings you into the space without even being fully immersed in it yet, in the physical. And the other thing that the sound does is because it's random enough, it's not, you don't have a chorus or something simple for the mind to then circle back around to and say, this is a familiar pattern. I mean, we know how actively our human minds essentially are designed to seek patterns. But this is then abstract enough that it's pleasing, but isn't considered noise. And then that also gets kind of the ego of the viewer or the ego of the musician or the creator. You don't listen to it the same way. I know for me, while I was busy in the creation of these generative sounds, if I would then go and listen to even some of my favorite pieces of music, suddenly they are, it's easy to perceive the ego of the musician or the creator behind it. And it almost feels like a stumbling block to be able to listen, to enter into more in-depth listening. And I'm a huge fan of Bach, and that's not an insult to Bach by any stretch of the imagination, because he's so complex anyway. But for me in this space, part of the decision of that was to help both get the viewer and myself kind of out of the way, so that there's the opportunity and the space for more of an encounter, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I love this brilliant place and space that you take us into, that you invite us into. It's so brilliant and so creative. And then hearing you elaborate on the sound aspect, as well as like the atmospheric and the spatial and the visual. So that you're really trying to bring us to an elevated space is what I'm getting, in our physiology, in our eyes, in our mind, and in our soul, and to really transport, in a way, this world to enter a space of just like purity and abstraction and almost like all that is beautiful and sacred. That's what I'm getting.
Ultimately, I hope that's part of the encounter, is that it's then a reflection of the individual, and each of us has that incredibly beautiful place within us. And if we can bump into that, yay.
Yeah, this is amazing. I love it. All right, let's go to the next one, Ezra. Okay.
Okay, so in the background, those yellow cubes, those to me were part of the exploration of right angles and spatial relationships. I was talking to the artist Larry Bell about, he makes these incredible glass cubes that you can just gaze into, and it engages so many different senses. And saying, what is it with the cubes? Why is this? He said, look around you. What's the most prevalent shape or form you see? And it was right angles. And to me, that's especially in man-made construction, in this thing of somehow, even behind me, here's a screen, here's a shelf, and here's a door frame. All of these things are right angles. And again, going back to this idea of how it is that is the way it influences us as humans. And then ultimately for the cubes, the idea of compartmentalization, how it almost encourages compartmentalization. I remember when I was a kid growing up, there was a TV show where someone presented let me see if I can find this puzzle. So it was a puzzle of 9 dots. Let me see if I can quickly create this. So here are these 9 dots. Where is it? Those 9 dots. So the idea, I don't know if you remember this, sometimes you'll see it in one of those restaurants where you get plastic tablecloths and that sort of thing. They used to have a menu with little puzzles and things for kids to do. So the idea is to connect all the dots using 4 straight lines, and without picking up your pen or pencil in between the creation of each of those 4 lines. And the solution is interesting in that it involves, all right, where do we go? Upside down and right side up. Okay. So part of the solution is where it gets interesting, is that you have to think outside the box, so to speak. And this act of moving outside of the constraints of the box that were created in the first place allows us to solve the puzzle. And when that was first shown to me, it was also backed up by a guy who was a scientist, but one of the things that he was talking about was in cultures where there are not lots of right angles. And at the time he referenced some tribal groups in Africa who had built their homes out of mud and clay and that sort of thing. And of course, they're not using drywall or gypsum board to make flat surfaces and right angles. And for them, it was super easy. They'd walk up to it and go, you mean that? That's a puzzle? Why is that a puzzle? That's not hard. Yet for most people, they'll sit and study it and think about it and be stumped by it, because we're in this right angle planar reality or construct. Anyway, yeah, there's all that in there.
Mm-hmm. So this right angle construct is a prevalent theme that you explore in your art, and saying how the way that our environment is with structures and whatnot really affects one on a cerebral level, on so many different levels. And then I feel like you're kind of wanting to bring us into a new view, so to speak. Is that correct?
Yeah. and a lot of times an individual doesn't even need to know all that stuff. That's just an interesting part of the engagement of the thing for me. And if we want to talk about it, then we can talk about it. But otherwise, you can just look at the thing and go, huh, that elicits an interesting feeling. What am I experiencing? And that's enough,
So it's just inviting the viewer to have an experience, to experience something, and whatever that is whatever it is. But yet you do pull from a wealth of knowledge and information that's interplaying in your work that are, areas of your interest that you like to, kind of penetrate into.
And it's, for me, there's also the thing of if like a good book, or even I've heard a few filmmakers talk about this, where especially a film within their work, yes, you watch the thing for 90 minutes, but if the next day or even later that day you're still thinking about it, that there was, to me, something I think I call sort of a stickiness quality to it. If there's some part of you, or there's some part of the work that then sticks with you and causes a place of reflection, or of it's something that dwells within us, it's a thing that dwells that we can refer back to. Different for me than so frequently with television and film, and now social media as a social binding of being able to say, oh, do you remember this scene when such and such and such and such happened? Oh, wasn't that great? There's a social aspect. But to me, I like the elements when, that really influenced me. That those are the kinds of things that to me are the kind of the precious moments
Yes.
of the interaction. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay.
So that is part of a series called photizo. And photizo is a Greek phrase. That's from my studio in Florida, that image. It's a Greek phrase that refers to, so the Greek word for light is phos, P-H-O-S. And then the application of light to, if one is reading biblical scripture and there's the illumination from the text, there's the idea that with it comes a revelation from God. And that act of the revelation is known as photizo, or the illumination of scripture. And to me, I'm just like, that there's a word for it. So frequently with language, we have, even for something as simple as the interaction or the connection with another person that we would describe as love. We have a few different versions of love, eros and agape and those sorts of things, but that's kind of it. We don't have a large language vocabulary for what is this supernatural thing, or this connection, or this thing that I feel with another person. We don't have that language structure. Of course, there's the references to larger uses of language of Eskimos, where they'll have words for different types of snow, or the different ways, the styles of how snow is falling, or the accumulation of snow. Or even Hawaiians have lots of words, and some other Polynesian groups have lots of words for waves. How much energy is in the wave. Is it a really big, monstrous wave? Or is it a slow, gentle blowing, and the wind is blowing off the top of the wave? All of those are different things, yet our language construct is, it's a wave. Is it a big wave? Yes, it's a big wave. It's a powerful wave. Okay. we're interacting with a limitation here, and it's the same kind of thing that even comes up in medicine, of, if you go with a series of symptoms to the doctor and say, I've got a red rash that's bothering me. What is this? And he'll look at it and say, well, red rash, you have a fever, you have this, you have that, you have, all those different things. Then they'll give it a label, And then once they have a label, so it's an important part of the procedure and the protocol is to come up with, based off of the symptoms, let's give it a diagnosis, i.e. a word, a label. And then from that, we can systematically address it and fix it or heal it. But we need this label. And if we don't have this label, then we're just describing a bunch of symptoms. So there's usefulness in Western scientific method of especially in medicine, of having an identifiable label. And for me, again, there's this thing of, okay, if there's a word for it, then we already have a common understanding, and it's not just one or two individuals that have experienced it. There is, oh, this is a thing. Therefore, we can build a construct and conversation based off of the thingness of that word. Not to get totally distracted by the thingness of the thing, but you understand what I'm saying of here is an element of language, therefore the commonality of it. So I got really excited when I learned that there was such a word as photizo.
Yeah. And I like this also, Ezra, because we get to see the scale of some of your work. And could you tell us a little bit of what are the materials in this particular one?
So this is LED light. And then the elements that the thing is made up of are, they're plastic. They're 3D printed plastic. And it's a mesh-like form. The things on the shelves, those are solid, more traditional 3D printed sculptures. You know, 3D printers are designed to be rapid prototyping devices or things that can make small quantities of the same thing, sort of. But the translucent plastic elements in that light sculpture, they originally started with I was using these robots, these printers to make forms, and one of them glitched and made an error. And I went, that's really interesting. Look at this little glitch. How can I make it do more of these glitches? So programming the machine to make a series of glitches all the way around, and then that makes the structure, which then also acts as, going essentially back to that first photograph, where the form is a mesh, is almost like a net. Mm-hmm. Which to me is interesting because it gets into it's beyond being semi-transparent. It's almost, it's a container, but then something can also pass through the container. So to me, it creates an interesting dialogue there. The plastics used in this piece, some of them are from are recycled plastic. Some of them are also corn-based plastic rather than purely petroleum-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so here is the Cultural Council piece.
And again, that's one of the more recent iterations or pieces that fall into this photizo idea. And to me, this is interesting in that some people would come up to me and say, "Oh, very clearly, one is masculine and one is feminine." You know, and I'm like, "Huh, okay, that's interesting." And so to me, it's always interesting to see how the work is interpreted by people. I have another work that changes color over time to bring awareness to the changing of perception. And there is, during an opening, there was a sofa opposite it, and during the opening there was alcohol served, and someone was sitting sitting in front of this piece on the sofa and looking at it and saying, "Okay, I know about the relativism of color, and I'm looking at this thing, and it's changing, and I've had something to drink, and I'm changing too. Okay, is it changing, or am I changing?" And to me, in that moment, that level of self-awareness of saying, what is my relationship with the piece? I love that. I love that. That to me is where it gets juicy and exciting. Yeah.
And that's ultimately where you want to bring the viewer to that space in whatever interpretation or perception that they have.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, is creating the environment and the space for the encounter or for the for the person to step into the space where there's going to be an interaction, and that gets into all kinds of things of the preparedness of space. I mean, this is in a gallery space, so one is going to the gallery knowing that they are going to interact with a work of art. So there's already the preparation or the understanding that there will be art or something contained therein, versus the random encounter with a piece of art in a public place. And to me, that's another interesting thread of a conversation, another conversation. But yeah.
And how many pieces in this series are there? And is it still continuing, Ezra?
It is still continuing. It's active. I've got another piece coming up in Florida at the Arts Warehouse in January. That will be quite a bit more of these. So another immersion installation photizo piece.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share. I'm wondering, when you're in your studio and we know these beautiful places and spaces and thoughts and information and knowledge that you bring to your work, when you're actually creating them, can you tap us into what you are experiencing, what your thought process is? Do you have these pieces, I hesitate to use the word, but kind of like sketched out, planned out? Are they very organic in their birth? You kind of know the materials you're going to use? Do you let things happen, or is it very structured? How does that play out for you?
Interesting question. For me, part of the other daily routine or practice is sketching. To me, it's vital. A good friend of mine, I do use an iPad to sketch stuff with color, but a good friend one time pointed out to me, no, the tactile quality of a pencil on the page, that scratchiness and the sound of it, there's something so sweet about that. There's also the importance of, again, going back to this idea or the moment of that spark of interaction of when the pen hits the paper. If your focus is there, everything else, the to-do lists, the people, all the stuff just disappears. And it's this interaction. So for me, yes, there is the drawing beforehand, and it's a way to keep the relationship of both the eye and the hand, so that there is that continual interaction, but then even the heart and the hand, or perception or feeling that goes with it. So that's important to maintain. Yes, I'll sketch stuff out, but by no means is that the end of it. Yes, it's stepping into the space and being in, ideally it moves into that what one would call flow space, or in sports, the zone where time just disappears, and the artist friends and I will sometimes talk about the importance of already being in a place where you're working when inspiration shows up. Because otherwise you're running around whipping out your notebook and trying to write down the idea or sketch it down. If you're already there, it works. It's that old analogy of the plumber. The plumber doesn't go to work when he's inspired. No, he's a plumber. He starts working and then it shows up. And even the old idea of, again, to go back to its kind of ancient Greek idea of the muse was almost like, what's his name? Dobby from, what's the kids' wizard movie that was just popular recently that was based off of the books? Do you remember what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? Harry Potter, that's it. So in Harry Potter, there's this character that looks kind of like a weird little elf creature that sort of walks out of the walls. And the idea was that the muse was the thing that would appear in the studio. It wasn't the individual. Oh, I am excellent. I am the artist. I'm brilliant. No, it doesn't have anything to do with you. It showed up, which frees the individual from getting caught up in all the ego stuff. We see ego run riot all the time. I mean, we're seeing that right now in the news with a great actor who's in the midst of a weird legal trial. I mean, yeah, that's entertaining. No, I don't really want to know, nor do I really care. But here is this situation where even the thought of, or the appearance of strange behavior is now a result of incredible success and incredible fame. And to me, it's always curious to see how that influences people. Having come from a movie background, was certainly exposed to superstars all the time. And that would be, to me, it's interesting how one manages success. You know, our ego, our inflated and deflating ego thing is so easily manipulated, or is so fragile to an extent. If someone comes up and starts pawning over you, saying, "Oh, you're brilliant, well done," you know, yeah, you start to puff up a little bit. And then that gets in the way. Or someone slams you in a critique, or a reviewer says something negative. It's devastating. In a way to say, it's not me. I was just there and the muse showed up. Isn't this great? Here we are doing a thing. To me, that's more exciting. So in relation to what's kind of going on in the head, you know, you step forward, you're in the active engagement, or I'll speak for myself, I'm in the active engagement of constructing the piece, but then always stepping back like one would imagine a painter. You know, you step back to then get another look at it. Even going for, that was one of the things that would come up in editing and film, is we're so close to the screen, we're so close to the timing and the interaction, sounds, all of the stuff that's happening. When it's time to review and edit, what do? Let's go for a walk. Let's go walk around the block. Let's completely clear the air, come back and look at it afresh and anew. And oftentimes, even with a problem, you know, if you're writing or you're trying to do some sort of programming or any sort of interaction with a computer program, we can get kind of stuck, or I can get stuck and kind of tenacious on the thing of, oh, wait, no, give me just a few more minutes. Let me figure this out. 45 minutes, 2 hours later, I'm still trying to figure it out. I go for a walk, I walk right in, it's solved. You know, so that thing of changing the scene helps. Yeah. And there's all sorts of psychological ideas on why that works, on how inspiration strikes and all that sort of thing. But the actual practice of the thing is, no, just give yourself the space and the time to get in there and do it. Mm-hmm. And I find that so frequently the biggest thing that I'm doing is trying to defend the time to be in the studio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was such a beautiful description and process, and getting into the studio, and then like the magic just kind of happens. And I love you sharing how your prior career in the film industry as an editor, how that plays out as well in your current artwork. Yeah,
I think it's important. You know, all the stuff that we bring into the studio and into the work is what makes the work unique.
Mm-hmm. And I also like how you were sharing also about like your senses are so alive. Like when you were describing that, I was like right there with you. You know, like you feel like when that pen or that pencil, when it's like touching the paper, it's like everything is like alive and has this like sense of, I'm going to go back to our word of transcendence, but yet it's very grounded in tactile reality, where your senses are just so kicked in. And I can just feel how that's such a beautiful space that you created. And then that muse just shows up, and then things just start to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you consider yourself an explorer, an experimenter? I mean, obviously we know you're a sculptor and interdisciplinary artist, but do you consider yourself any of these words or anything else to kind of like that kind of direct you in terms of your art?
I think that one of the biggest things, one of the things that I tell younger artists as well, because sometimes they'll be like, well, you know, should I work on the iPad, or should I work on the pens using pen and paper, or should I be painting in acrylics, or should it be in oils, or, you know, is collage all right? All these sorts of things. It's like, it doesn't matter. What are you interested in? What are you going to keep doing? And if that means that you're interested in using different types of pasta plastered onto a canvas, and you're painting them, or you're putting other kinds of food on, okay, if that's where your thread is, stick with it, but keep doing it. Don't go, oh, well, now I'm interested in, well, ultimately, yeah, if you're interested in something completely different, that's okay, but give yourself the permission and the space to be a little bit vigilant in showing up every day, or creating the habit of it, of being in the habit of doing the creative work. To me, it's vital just to keep with the thread of interest, and it moves and changes. It evolves over time, because if it was the same thing over and over again, yeah, there would be the comfort and the expansion in the commonality and in the routine of it. But that's a different conversation, and that's in a way not that interesting to me.
And I think that's great advice for anybody who's watching this, that's, I think, working in any creative field, because you're really saying have that sense of authenticity, because you're saying that people have come to you saying, well, should I work in acrylic? Should I do this? Should I do that? And you're saying, follow your area of interest, which brings us full circle as we move into closing the show, which you were saying is very, very important to you, is that point of interest and really exploring it in a very dedicated and thoughtful and pure way. And then you've shared with us all these ways, practical ways that you aim to actually get there and kind of eliminate the clutter, so to speak, or the chatter or anything that may be disturbing, to open that door. And it's been so beautiful to hear you share about all these things and your process, and to look at your art, which is just so deep and provocative. And hearing you share about this is just really quite fascinating.
Thank you for creating the platform to be able to do so. I love the work that you're doing of bringing artists together and creating, essentially what you're doing is creating an online environment, or a community of artists. And to me, that's huge and very needed. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you. We have you and all the amazing artists that have come on to share about their art and to help us really dive into what is their art all about, and really see it from their eyes, and dive into their mind and their heart, and really, explore it at deep levels. So thank you so much, Ezra.
Happy to be on board. Thank you for having.
Yeah, absolutely. As we do close out the show, we always kind of pass the mic, so to speak, to our guest. Are there any closing comments that you'd like to share with us? And if you could let us know how to stay connected with you, social media, website, and whatnot.
I'll start with the last order first, so to speak. To stay connected, EzraHubbard.com, EzraHubbard.com. There's Instagram, would love Instagram followers, of course, and it is an interesting and fun way to stay in touch. There's Facebook, both of those you can search for the name and it'll appear. And there's contact info on the website if anyone wants to reach out and be in touch. I've been spending a lot of time in the Virginia area, so if there are artists who want to connect in the Virginia area, certainly reach out. In terms of parting thoughts or conversation, to me, it's, if you're an artist, keep jamming, keep plugging, keep doing it, because it is, I still have that altruistic idea of art can change the world. I believe it, so stick with it and keep doing it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ezra, for those closing comments, and much success to you in all of your art endeavors and all of your projects.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching Art and Talk. As always, we appreciate the time you take to watch our artist videos. Stay in touch with us. We still have a few more guest artists from the Art Acquisitions exhibit currently on view at the Cultural Council for Palm Beach County to bring to you. Just a little reminder that Art and Talk's current project to promote peace through art, the Make Art Not War project, is still accepting video submission. So if you'd like to enter that, it's open to all artists working in any art form. I'll post a video at the end of this one so you can check that out for a few more guidelines. And thank you again, Ezra, for this fascinating dive into your art. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon on the next Art and Talk. Until then, Be well and be blessed.
Bye, y'all.